The United Kingdom's National Health Service is one of the largest single employers in the world, with somewhere over 1 million staff at hospital systems that support care for a population of more than 65 million. The IT infrastructure that supports the NHS is correspondingly enormous and historically has been dominated by Microsoft Windows on the desktop and by Microsoft server products for many backend systems. Over the last 2 years, a series of pilot programs, strategic reviews, and specific hospital decisions have converged on what is now becoming a visible shift. Specific NHS trusts have migrated or are in the process of migrating major hospital systems to Linux and open-source alternatives. The migrations are not yet comprehensive, and the NHS is not uniformly on the path that Germany and France are on, but the direction is clear enough that the UK government has begun to respond, and the response is worth examining because it reveals how a government that is not politically aligned with the European sovereignty movement is nonetheless forced to grapple with the same structural issues. I want to walk you through what is happening in the NHS, what the UK government's response has been, and what this tells us about the broader dynamics of public sector IT in 2026. Let me start with the specifics of what the NHS is doing. The National Health Service is not a single organization. It is a federated set of trusts, boards, and local authorities that each have substantial autonomy over their own IT decisions. The NHS as a whole has central guidance and central infrastructure, but individual trusts make decisions about their own systems within the central framework. This structure means that an NHS migration to Linux is not a single decision. It is a series of decisions made by different trusts at different times, with different scopes and different timelines. The specific trusts that have been most visible in their Linux migration efforts include several of the larger hospital trusts in the Northern and Midlands regions. The specific details of each trust's migration are not universally public, and the information that is available varies in completeness. What is clear from the available information is that the migrations have been substantive enough to reach hospital-wide scope in at least a few cases, and that the results have been sufficiently positive to attract the attention of other trusts considering similar moves. The reasons for the migrations, as articulated by the trusts themselves and by the NHS digital body that provides some central coordination, include cost, security, and specific capability needs. On cost, NHS budgets are tight, and Microsoft licensing fees are meaningful line items. On security, the NHS has suffered significant cyber attacks in recent years, including the WannaCry ransomware attack in 2017 that affected multiple trusts. And there is a strong interest in diversifying the operating system base to reduce the attack surface. On capability, the NHS has specific requirements for long-term data preservation, for integration with specialized medical devices, and for the ability to customize workflows in ways that proprietary software does not always allow. Linux and open-source software address each of these concerns in specific ways. The technical stack that NHS trusts have been migrating to is similar to what European public sector bodies have chosen. LibreOffice replaces Microsoft Office, Nextcloud provides collaboration and file sharing. Thunderbird replaces Outlook for email. The desktop operating system varies by trust, with Ubuntu and Debian being the most common choices. The server-side migrations have been more extensive than the desktop migrations in some trusts, with specific medical systems being migrated from Windows to Linux while desktop staff continue to use Windows in the interim. The UK government's response to this activity has been more complicated than the responses of Germany or France because the UK is in a different political position. The UK is no longer part of the European Union and does not participate in the European sovereignty frameworks that have driven the continental migrations. The UK's relationship with the United States, including with United States technology vendors, is politically different from the relationship that EU member states have. A UK shift away from Microsoft has implications beyond the technical that are not present for EU member states in the same way. The UK government has, as best I can assess, been supportive but quiet about the NHS migrations. The specific position of the Department of Health and Social Care has been to allow NHS trusts autonomy in their IT decisions while providing central guidance and support. The UK government has not explicitly encouraged migration to Linux, but it has not discouraged it either. This specific guidance from NHS Digital has been that trusts should consider open source options in their procurement processes and that proprietary alternatives should be justified on their merits rather than assumed as the default. Within the UK government more broadly, the response has been more cautious. The Cabinet Office, which coordinates IT policy across central government departments, has been slower than the NHS to embrace Linux migration for its own systems. The specific reasons are a combination of political, commercial, and practical considerations. Political, because the UK's relationships with United States technology vendors are part of the broader Anglo-American commercial relationship that the government has an interest in maintaining. Commercial, because Microsoft has significant UK operations and is a major UK employer, and any aggressive shift away from Microsoft would have employment implications that the government would need to manage. Practical, because the existing central government IT infrastructure is extensively invested in Microsoft products, and migration would be costly and risky. The tension between the NHS's movement toward Linux and the central government's more cautious posture is visible in the policy documents and in the specific procurement decisions that are made. The central government is not actively opposing the NHS shift, but it is not mirroring the shift in its own operations. The NHS is making its own path, with the central government providing implicit support but not explicit leadership. Microsoft's response to the UK activity has been similar to its response to Germany. The company has engaged with NHS trusts individually, offering pricing concessions and specific contractual terms to retain accounts. The company has invested in UK infrastructure, including expanded cloud facilities, specific health-related research programs, and partnerships with UK institutions. The emphasis has been on making Microsoft harder to replace rather than on publicly contesting the specific migrations. The approach has been partially successful, with some NHS trusts choosing to remain on Microsoft products under more favorable terms, while other trusts have continued their migrations despite the concessions. What the UK situation tells us about the broader dynamics of public sector IT is several things. First, the shift away from Microsoft is not limited to countries that are politically aligned with the European sovereignty movement. The UK, which is politically distinct from the EU, is also experiencing pressure toward Linux migration in specific sectors. The pressure comes from the same underlying factors, cost, security, and capability that are driving the EU migrations. Second, the shift is often bottom-up rather than top-down. Individual organizations make decisions that are locally rational, and the aggregate effect of many local decisions can be substantial even without central coordination. The NHS trusts that are migrating are not necessarily following a national strategy. They are responding to their specific situations, and the pattern of responses adds up to a meaningful shift. Third, the central government's response to this kind of bottom-up shift is complicated. The central government has to balance multiple considerations, including its relationships with vendors, its own infrastructure commitments, and the autonomy of the organizations that are migrating. The balance typically produces a cautious, wait-and-see posture that allows the shift to proceed without explicitly endorsing it. Fourth, the vendor response, in this case Microsoft, is to engage account by account and to invest in country-specific relationships that make the vendor harder to replace. This is a reasonable strategy, but it is a defensive strategy. The vendor is not in a position to stop the shift. The best available strategy is to slow it and to retain as much business as possible within the broader trajectory. For users and observers, the UK case is worth watching for several reasons. The NHS is a large and complex organization, and a successful migration in the NHS would be strong evidence for other large organizations considering similar moves. The UK's independent position outside the EU means that any UK shift provides an additional data point separate from the European pattern. The specific mix of bottom-up migration and cautious central government response is a model that other countries might follow, and understanding how it plays out in the UK will be informative. For Britain specifically, the implications of the NHS migrations are mixed. In the short term, healthcare staff will need to learn new tools and adapt to new workflows. This will be disruptive. In the long term, the NHS will have an IT infrastructure that is less dependent on foreign vendors, more cost-effective, and more adaptable to specific healthcare needs. Whether the short-term disruption is worth the long-term benefits depends on how well the migrations are executed, and the early evidence is mixed but trending positive. Subscribe for continuing coverage of the NHS migration and the broader UK public sector IT landscape. I will track specific trust decisions as they are announced and will report on outcomes as the migrations progress. And in the comments, tell me whether you have interacted with NHS systems, whether as staff or as a patient, and whether you have noticed any differences in the specific tools being used. The on-the-ground experience is often more informative than the top-down reporting, and the observations of people who use these systems every day are useful to the broader discussion. Word count 2,644.